we will be directing a lot of our conversations to the two of you, but feel free to participate, or if you have any questions or want to add anything, feel free to. We are Color Fandom, just to let you all know a little bit about us. We are a social group, geek group, that focuses on exploring geekdom, all things fandom, through a lens of diversity and inclusion. And so we'd like to explore ideas, panels that are related to that type of thing. So today, I'm Donna.
I'm Deborah.
Early.
And we've been around for about 10 years now, I think, this year. So we very much enjoy doing all things paneling. Today we're going to be talking about evolution. Are we becoming better? So we're going to look at biology, society, and technology as it relates to evolution. So the first thing I think is important is understanding what evolution means, because a lot of times people think of evolution as things getting better, some type of improvement. That's not necessarily the definition of it, so I just pulled out one definition from the Collins English Dictionary, looking at it really going from simple to complex. But there is the term progressive change, and so that seems to have the connotation of positivity or things getting better. That's not going to always be the case as we look through these different examples. So we're looking at specific types of evolution, biological evolution, and that is the change. The definition I got from Science Direct is looking at it as the change in inherited traits over successive generations and populations of organisms. So it's really a change versus something getting better or worse. And then social evolution, I saw social evolution and sociocultural evolution, which I think we explore both of them. But these look like when we look at social evolution, there's the idea of change, directional change. But then when we look at sociocultural, there seems to be this implied idea of things getting better. There is this difference from what our ancestors may have been societally. And then technological is transformation of society through technology. So we're going to first look at biological evolution in sci-fi. I just have a couple of examples, but y'all add, I have a few pictures, but add some of them. So one thing that is already has been happening for a while is the blending of synthetics and organics. So when we think about, even today, people get an artificial something, knee or anything. So this is not anything new, but when we think of evolution, if we think about the future, what we might see with this idea of more cybernetics, having more cyborgs. So I just have an example from Cyberpunk. I don't know if anybody's played Cyberpunk, but okay, a lot of the people in the game do have some type of synthetic aspect to their being. Another example I put on here is Furiosa from Mad Max, where I don't know how much of this is futuristic, because having some type of prosthetic is not anything new, and this is what we really see with her. And then I have from Terminator, yeah.
Salvation?
Yeah, I think
I
that's
think some of them blend into me. Or the third? 2, 3, or Salvation?
It was, yeah, Salvation.
Yeah,
Salvation.
Salvation. Where he thought he was human, but he was actually Terminator.
Yeah, so we see this actually a lot in sci-fi, this idea. Is anybody in here a Mass Effect gamer or ever played Mass Effect? So Mass Effect has a whole storyline about the dangers of synthetics, but then there is a storyline that talks about how synthetics and organics need to work together and live together and whatnot. So that's not just an evolution of people, but different types of beings coming together.
Can I give an example? I'm going to give a cartoon example. It's going to be Ben 10. Ben 10 is, even though Ben doesn't physically evolve, he's using alien technology for purposes, you know, to be a plumber, to do all of that. And that is an evolution on them because, of course, humans still don't have access to that. So they're using an advanced technology to give them more power because of their own human limitations. So that's another way that an evolved technology that they use a watch for, that he blends with that technology for the different types of aliens that he represents. That's just my little example.
Yeah. Okay, so genetic engineering, if anybody knows Khan from Star Trek, Khan and his race of basically super beings were genetically engineered, and I believe, I'm trying to remember the lore, but I believe that they might have had something to do with a war or something, but they were created and then they were sort of cast aside. You know? So we have, we're actually, you know, these types of experimentation, it's not that far-fetched. I mean, these things are happening now. Not to the degree or the awareness as, you know, science fiction, but there are experimentations and genetic engineering that's going on. The woman in the picture, this is another one from Mass Effect. As y'all will be able to see throughout this, I'm a big Mass Effect fan, but Miranda was genetically engineered to be a superior being, and so this idea of creating better people is something that's been going on even in history. We've seen it, unfortunately, during times where there's been horror, such as Nazi Germany, this idea of trying to create a master race or better humans. And so we see that duplicated in a lot of science fiction.
I'm going to use my favorite all-time science series. Donna, what's my favorite all-time?
Babylon 5.
Thank you.
Yes, I do know it.
The genetic engineering that I was going to talk about is probably the most pivotal one in the series, and that's between the Minbaris and humans in the show. Because in the beginning, with the Minbari, they're just like, they're superior towards everyone. They're just better. But you find out later on in the series that the connection between them and humanity only really happened because a human was genetically altered to become a Minbari to change their history. The evolution actually of that Minbari race actually happened because of modified human. And so that's one of the twists, but it's like 30 years old, you'll still get it. But that's the whole thing, is like this human had to be genetically modified so they could go help another race get out of its, at that time, more violent stage to become what they are in the future, which is considered more peaceful, more enlightened. So, yeah. Oh, she has.
Oh, yes, please.
Would you consider like Captain America's super soldier serum to also be a form of genetic engineering? Or
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a great example. Yeah, towards the end. This is what you talk about, the experimentation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we put that in. A lot of these bleed into each other. So because genetic engineering, experimentation, all of that can sort of be linked together.
Yeah, so like we also have a lot of post-apocalyptic shows and movies on here too, because that either is the cause of it or it ends up being it because they're trying to find a cure. In Sweet Tooth, which was a comic and turned into a series. It was both. They did experimentation to form the hybrid kids, and then it ended up causing what they call the sickness that caused the apocalypse. And then now they're experimenting on the kids, on the hybrid kids, to find a cure to the sickness.
We see this situation where humans cause a problem and then try to fix it by causing more problems. This seems to be a running thing.
And yeah, and also in the Maze Runner, and I think it was a very underrated movie trilogy. Especially with the last one, they discovered that they're experimenting on the teens and trying to find the cure to their form of zombieism. So.
I added a picture of a Krogan from what is my favorite game,
Mass
Effect. So the Krogan are a species in the universe, in the galaxy. They were brought up by another species to fight. So they were brought up, and they were actually introduced to technology that was beyond them, so that they would evolve kind of quickly. And they were created to be a soldier type of race. Well, when they got to be too good at what they do, and they also are very prolific breeders, the same group that brought them up, that tried to evolve them quickly, also wanted to limit them. So they created something called the genophage, which basically makes it so that only 1 in 1,000 births live for them. So in a sense, they're really making this race somewhat die out. And not only is it the physical change, but it has created in them a lot of depression, hopelessness, because they don't have a feeling that they have a future. So it's not really experimentation, but we do see this modification of a person's or a group's biology. They're not human, but we see that they're humanoid. Eugenics, so this is really from, there was an episode of Star Trek Next Generation called The Masterpiece Society, where they're really eugenics and genetic engineering with this group of beings on this planet, where their society was was created to be perfect. And so the eugenics aspect of breeding, inheriting certain qualities, they didn't want outsiders to be a part of their society. Also the genetic engineering that was going on there, so that to the point that if anyone left their society, the society would crumble. So everything was very much based on the biology of the society, making it perfect. Okay, so I have Jordy on here for eradication of illnesses and physical and mental disabilities. So on Star Trek, Jordy was asked the question several times, why did he have a visor? Because they could have, he could have gotten new eyes, basically. And he does mention that, and in that episode, what ends up happening is, because he has a visor, he's able to save this particular group of people. And so he comments on the fact that if he had not been in the situation he was in, then these other people wouldn't have benefited. So although we see in a lot of futuristic stories and shows where there's the idea of illnesses being wiped out, there is the question of, or physical and mental abilities. The fact that if that is a future where certain things don't exist, what harm does that do to society? And that point is not brought up a lot in these shows. Changes in physicality and transhumanism. So another one of my favorite shows, which I will keep saying over and over, is The Expanse. This is where we actually see bodies, human bodies changing as a result of where people live. So the Belters live in the asteroid belt, and because there's no gravity, their bodies have changed so that they cannot really survive the gravity on Earth or in Mars. And the Martian bodies have changed a little bit, but not as much as Belters. And so we see that as a result of where people live, that change, that human change. Lucy, which, I mean, was not a good movie. I thought it was kind of ridiculous, but yeah, but the good thing was it actually did make people do some research when it comes to how much of our brains we use, because the idea, the myth that people are always told is we only use 10% of our brain, which is not true. But in this movie, she uses 100% of her brain, and all of a sudden she can do some crazy stuff. And so there's that transhumanism idea. From Mass Effect, this character on the right, Kaden, is a biotic. And so we see that humans are evolving the ability to, as a result of certain elements in the universe, humans are evolving the ability to, for telekinesis and things like that. So this change in physicality, transhumanism, we do see those changes in futuristic shows. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so the life after death is another one. Long life, I didn't include that on here, but also this idea of life after death. So has anybody seen Altered Carbon in here? If you have seen it, and I think it's two seasons, both seasons mention the idea that the consciousness of humans is located or has been put in a chip in people's, like, I guess, spine or whatever, the base of their brain. And so that consciousness can be transferred into another body. We do see this in science fiction shows often. You want to talk about Black Mirror?
So has everybody seen Black Mirror?
Yeah.
So it's an anthology, but there is an ongoing thing that they're all linked. It's in the same, or maybe a few universes, but they have what they call as cookies, which is they take the consciousness and implant it into a drive or something, and then they can implant that into anything, And so in this particular, in San Junipero, it's basically you can live, your consciousness is living on, and you can choose to. It also has a religious aspect to it where, if you think you're gonna go to heaven and die and just not have your consciousness live on, or if you want to have your consciousness live on and then have a life after death.
And that's also in Altered Carbon, the idea of religion comes into play. There are people who are protesting even the idea of people doing this. So that's an interesting concept of how people view this. So those are like and like I said, these are going to all bleed into each other. Societal evolution. In a lot of our science fiction, there's this idea of especially in Star Trek, There's this idea that there's no more poverty, there are no more isms like racism, sexism, classism, or xenophobia. Now, in Star Trek, The Next Generation, so I grew up with Next Gen, so that's the one I know more than anything. Picard, or people in the show, will tell other people this is how society is, at least everybody who's part of the Federation. But they rarely talk about how they got to this point. We get the idea that there was some type of war. And after the war, that's when, they got better, I guess. But we really are never given much of an explanation. So there's sort of this idea of a utopia. My students, we've talked about utopias and how difficult it is to create a utopia or read a book about a utopia. We talked about the translation of utopia, which is not meaning a perfect society, but meaning no place. It technically translates into no place, and which is why you see a whole bunch of dystopias, but you can't find a utopia. But supposedly the Federation is one as a result of not having these issues. With the acceptance of all forms of sexual orientation and gender identity, I see that in a lot of science fiction shows, The Expanse, Star Trek too, the newer Star Trek shows, because the older ones, no, you didn't see that. There was still a lot, their xenophobia and everything was just turned into other alien species, but even though we hear about these things, what we see is not the case in a lot of these shows. In The Expanse, there is definite classism. That's pretty much the crux of it. Battlestar Galactica, we even see, this type of idea. In The Expanse, we do see, I was really pleased to see differing familial structures. So they talk a lot about polyamorous societies and family structures in that.
One show, Snowpiercer, when they turned it into a TV show, they expanded a lot on the acceptance of all forms of sexual orientation and familiar structures, because they have and classism, of course, because they had each train car was a different class, basically. But like there are, people are living in their own familiar structures in each train car. And so, they're shown poly couples and how they interact and how they decide to have a family or to grow a family in it. So that was good to see on TV.
That's sort of like in The Expanse, because their poly societies are because families are the ship, whatever your crew is your family. And so we see that this is why the relationships are constructed in this manner. There is an understanding of why. Also because of the conditions of Earth at the time that The Expanse takes place, one of the main characters, Holden, actually has maybe 8 or 9 parents because they couldn't have a bunch of kids. You were limited in how many kids you could have. So all of these people wanted a child, so they all came together for one child.
Can I add?
Go ahead. I already talked about it.
The societal evolution one reminded me, and please, if you are a comic book person, you can correct me, about the Kree and the Skrull, and how the Celestials came to the planet. They were both on it. They had their own different type of society, whatever. And they were like, we want to see who's gonna, if given the choice, put on this planet, who's really gonna evolve the best, or who's gonna evolve to a point where we will help you or give you certain technologies if we like what we see. And so they go to the different planets, they keep them there for like a year. And one of them builds a garden. And the other builds like builds like this glass society. And the one that builds a glass society finds out that the folks that won the garden was going to get the prize. And that made them mad, and they're just like, oh no, that's not gonna happen. And then they attack them and kill them all off. Because they're like, we worked for this, we did what you thought you wanted, and now you're telling us we can't have it? And so it's just really interesting, like, it could be a forced societal evolution for a prize that they think they're supposed to get. And then when you've got one that becomes more peaceful and another one that becomes more violent and militaristic, you know, what was that evolution great?
Right.
So, but yeah, that's what kind of came into my brain when I was thinking of that just now.
One other thing I wanted to bring up with Star Trek is the idea of the Prime Directive and the United Federation of Planets. So, although we do see what we hear about a lot in Star Trek Next Gen, of course, is one I'm focused most on, is how peaceful they are and how this is a wonderful group to be with. But we also realize that that's the case if you follow the rules of the Federation. So there is a hierarchy to this. Also, the Prime Directive is supposed to, the understanding is it's supposed to ensure that societies that have not been exposed to certain things will not be exposed to them before they're supposed to be. But every captain I can think of broke that rule. I mean, they would never leave these planets alone. If it worked for them, they broke that rule. So the Prime Directive was supposed to help with evolution, but they never really did it justice. The Expanse, from what people have explained, is the Expanse is a great example of colonization, where if you would think of Earth as Europe and think of Mars as America. So the Earthers who left Earth went to Mars. Now, Mars society on the Expanse is much more militaristic than any of the other areas in the Expanse. The belt and the outer planets, these are people who are hardworking, who are very much discriminated against, who are seen as the second, third class citizens. So we see very much society as it is today in this show. Battlestar Galactica definitely had a disparity with not just the Cylons and the humans, but also the different planets. Wherever humans came from, whichever planet they came from, people may have looked down upon them or viewed them as higher up. Has anyone seen Battlestar Galactica, this series? They talk about, there are some episodes where they talk about how certain people, depending on what planet, even though now they're all in ships, so they're not on their planets, but depending on what planet people came from, those were the jobs, there were certain jobs open to them. And so we see how they're having to now quickly evolve from that type of thinking, because that's not their lifestyle anymore. I won't bore y'all anymore. And this is, of course, the different family structures. So this whole family, all of them are married. So technological evolution. A lot of times we think of science fiction and we think of evolution, we jump right to technology. Of course, technology is in a lot of these other things that we've talked about, but just to touch on some of these. Of course, with the space travel, we have a warp drive on Star Trek. We have the Epstein drive on The Expanse. We have the TARDIS, I guess, on Doctor
Time
Who.
and space.
Yeah, we have, I'm trying to think of every type, and all of these are ways so that humans can get out of the solar system, basically, or get away from Earth. And so we have to come up with ways. That's one thing we don't have right now that I know of, is a way for humans to travel fast enough to be able, and right now we would have to be on a generational ship to get anywhere. And my understanding is we have not done that. So that is something that we definitely see a lot of. Communication. We always have a universal translator that translates into English. And it's either going to be English, British English, or American English. Those are the two that everybody speaks. And also what's interesting with Mass Effect, I mean, these humanoid beings don't even have facial structures that would allow their mouths to make the sounds that would make words. However, the translator seems to also translate body language, because for some reason everybody does the same thing. They hug each other, they high five, they do all of that. So I guess those communicators are something else. An Omni tool in Mass Effect is one of those tools. It's very similar to the what's the thing? The tricorder, I think, in Star Trek. The thing that does everything. And so that's sort of what an Omni tool is.
The doctor is screwdriver.
Oh, screwdriver.
I would have been real disgusted with myself. I would have been real upset with myself. Like, look at my shirts. But yeah, the Doctor Who's screwdriver. That is literally will do everything and anything. It makes no sense, but it has evolved to a point where it just does whatever. You want it to, give a countdown to a rocket ship, there, it happened, so it absolutely is an Omni tool, same way.
But look at the communication we have now. I mean,
Right.
Today where the idea on Star Trek to ask a computer to answer a question was like, wow.
Right. Right.
Right.
And we think nothing of it now. Just like I think about the fact that we can't even live without this little computer that we carry around, and if it's not charged up, our lives have fallen apart.
Like when AT&T went down.
Yes, and that people didn't know what to do,
Well, I don't know about you, but I get really annoyed when it starts to answer questions when I'm just talking randomly.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I did not ask you for an
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah.
I'm trying to stop it from asking them.
Yeah, in regards to the universal translator, I mean, the large language models aren't there 100%, but in another year, we will have that technology available to us. I mean, Google's already almost there.
Oh, I did. I used it when I was overseas, because when I was in when I was in Korea, and when I was in it was some other country I couldn't think of. I literally Mexico. That's where I was. Mexico. I had to get an Uber. It's all in Spanish. We can decipher Spanish because of our own American culture. We are integrated with a lot of cultures, Spanish being the biggest one. So a lot of our current language comes from Spanish. So there's some things, of course, you can decipher. But overall, sentence structure, like, hey, I'm wearing this outfit on the corner, no. So I went to Google Translate. I'm just like, this is what I need. I put it in the Google Translator, and then when they came to pick me up, they immediately started speaking Spanish, and I'm like, I should literally, they just started speaking Spanish, and I'm like, no, I'm so sorry, I don't actually speak Spanish. I'm like, thank you, Google Translate, for making me sound like I'm actually and so I had to tell them, like, no habla español over here, and but I was like, thank you, that really helped me out, because they knew where to look for me in the outfit that I was wearing. But I was just like, dang. They was like, you didn't realize that this is coming from a Mexican over here? And I was just like, dang. But, I mean, to your point, it's just like...
And it used to not be that good.
Yeah,
I mean,
if you think about it, if you put in headphones, like if you have an earbud and it's telling you how to pronounce, like, you're supposed to say that, like, it wouldn't be that hard to have a universal translator that you would just copy and you have to trust it to translate correctly.
Right.
But,
An interesting episode, the Darmok and Jalad
Yes.
episode,
Yes.
Star Trek, they couldn't translate that.
Yeah.
Well, it was English, so that part had been translated, but they couldn't figure out the metaphor aspect. So it's interesting, with communication. I mean, we all know, ChatGPT is a big thing now. So I was playing around with it because I wanted to see how good is this thing, and I really needed a description for a class. I was like, I don't want to figure it out. And so I said, I need a class that does this, blah, blah, blah. Oh my goodness. I mean, if you need a resume done or something like that, go to ChatGPT because it'll kick out. But unfortunately though, I can see how in the future, so many people are going to be out of jobs because of this thing. But I think about what our communicators, our phones, those things like that have already, taken over. So people have been out of jobs.
I think one trip for language translators are euphemisms that, just little things like, just for our own, like what happens to the chicken that crossed the road, stuff like that. Or, just little things, little anecdotes, little folk stories. If you don't know it, if you're not in that culture, and you're just like, it can't come across well through a translator because yes, you told me an anecdote from your culture, but that literally means nothing to me,
Right.
So I think while yes, it will help us translate, but I think it hopefully gives folks the wanting them more to learn about that culture because yes, you can take it and it's like, order your food, whatever, but it's just like that one thing about like certain cultures that are part of it that's just, you just can't AI that.
If you're not from here or from the South, if I say bless, and you can say bless your heart different ways, and they all mean different things.
Right.
So unless you are, but if you look at a book like 1984 that was written in 1948, in that story, what it is the words are being taken away from the language. So it's a simplification of language, and there's a fear there that expression will be so basic and limited that we won't have those nuances that we need.
Has anybody noticed on, I think it's either Instagram or Facebook, because I have to do, my post for this in my business, but they've added AI to it.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they have?
Yeah, they have.
Even on
So
video.
like you can, so when you write, they have it so you can, a button you can push and it'll say, do you want this to be in, to form your post.
Wow.
And they put it on the app.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would say one evolution that we're seeing now, I'm an educator, so I'm seeing some changes I'm an English teacher. And we're actually moving away from having kids write essays the way they used to. They're doing more things orally, they're doing more things project-based. We're looking for critical thinking versus can you spell correctly, whatever. Because Grammarly, you don't even need to, you have it. So we're having to adjust what do we think kids need to get from school, not what we used to. So it's very different from when I was in school.
To your point about removing words, like I'm sure you've all watched enough shows where they're using the standard language, That means that it's so, like to Donna said, it's so basic that everybody should understand it because it's the standard. And it's just like, that removed every aspect of who they are or their culture as a person, and they're basically the most dominant culture, which usually in most sci-fi things are usually English speakers, mostly American English speakers, and they're forcing their will on them because like, hey, we're the dominant ones for whatever reason, and you need to deal with that, and you need to go with the standard. And honestly, it's kind of like that now, because for a lot of businesses, a lot of other, for anything really, a lot of it is you have to be an English speaker. even though English is not the number one language.
Yeah.
It's Chinese,
Chinese language.
Spanish is the next one. But because as a culture that of English speakers is so prominent and dominant, it's like everybody has to accommodate for that, and it's interesting to see.
Can I provide another example of
Yes.
that as well? I think, especially in terms of like language translation, I think about the stories that I've heard about some of the first anime to be dubbed and subtitled over into English for American viewers. A lot of it was really some of the initial stuff was either really incomprehensible or they had to completely change the entire plot because there was so much kind of built-in nuance and context and stuff. And obviously the process of the translation has improved a lot, and people in America know more about like Japanese culture so that they can understand it more. But also, I think one of the things people have said is that it has changed the nature of the kind of content being produced in Japan because they are, not all of it obviously, but there's a whole subsegment of like, well, we need to remove as much as we can of the stuff that is foreign about Japanese culture. So because the intent is to send it over to America and make sure it's going to be popular there, which then changes the entire art form.
Yeah.
A good example of that are the Power Rangers. The Power Rangers, the American version of it looks nothing like the Japanese version of it. Like, and the storylines, some of the storylines are similar, but there's literally one season, I'm just outing you out as a person that enjoyed Power Rangers and still does now. And I will watch Super Sentai as well. There's literally a season of the Power Rangers that is about ecological disaster. That is not what it was for the Japanese version. It was just about racing cars. But this version was talking about this dystopian world and this other thing. I'm just like, why is this so, I mean, they were both actually good stories, but why is this so completely different? It's because they had to accommodate, because what they were doing in the Japanese version would not be relatable to any kid that's watching it. Because it's literally just racing cars. It's like NASCAR. Kids gonna watch that. But if you've got this dystopian world where they're just doing all of these other things that kids have seen in our culture, they will relate to that. It's just like they completely shifted it. And I'm just like, wow. But they've done that through a series of episodes. They literally had a Super Sentai that was literally one piece, Power Rangers. But they couldn't really relate to that because unless you are an anime person, these kids don't know what One Piece is. You know, like the ones that that watch anime, but outside of just a regular kid, they're not gonna know what One Piece is. So all of the things that they did in there, they had to switch it around. So just to your point, yeah, they absolutely do that.
I know that Squid Game, they had talked about that. The fact that if you listen to the dub version or even read the subtitles, there were some nuances that you lost that made more sense if you understood the language and could listen to that.
She said entertainment.
3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes. Okay, so entertainment, Ready Player One. Now that is, we do have that today because I haven't seen that I know. Yeah, so.
Well, the
start. We
of
just need
that.
the suit, which I think we'll have in a year.
Well, that in Ready Player One, you know, they kind of built. Well, it was to, you know, have so they could earn money and stuff like that. But you know, they did build the society around.
Yeah.
And it was also, I guess, you know, class too, where, you know, and you just wanted to live in the headset.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because of the world was
Because,
so bad. Yeah. And it was also a way to control people, so, you know, which I can see that happening because I'm kind of controlled in my headset. Also a holodeck, which I wish we had. I don't know anybody who wouldn't want to go visit a holodeck.
Well, and then now, and the whole world of the Matrix, I mean, they had to, you know, build that after, you know, the war with the machines, but, you know, but then they get to choose if they want to live inside the Matrix or if they want to live, you know, inside the apocalyptic universe as it is.
What's the name of the guy who decided that he wanted to go back in and get back plugged up?
Oh, that was.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Cypher.
Cypher. Cypher, you know, it's like, I know. I understand. I would have done what Cypher did.
He was
Make
like,
me somebody famous, a mistake, you know.
But he was like, I know this thing doesn't taste like anything.
Yeah.
But
But you see what this slump they have to eat in real life, I was like, plug me back in, please. I understood Cypher completely. And so that is, I think, all that we have. So this is just a quick, just types of evolution that we see in science fiction. I'm sure you all can think of some other ones that we didn't mention. Do y'all have anything else? Yeah, does anybody have any type of technological, societal, or biological examples you'd like to share?
of any shows or
Yeah.
movies we have.
If you're familiar with the young adult novel The Giver by Lois Lawson.
Yes.
I'm sure she.
Yeah, it was talking about utopian society, and it was really a dystopian about trying to be a utopian.
Right. Because they were, everything was toned down, right? It was like a black and
And
white-ish
they were
type.
kind of kept in the dark and told what they needed to know. And
Right.
Medicine.
Take your medicine, that
Right.
suppressed hormones and
Right.
reproduction and, yeah.
Which is a common thread in YA dystopian stories of, you know, the world control. People trying to control people, and there's always the one kid who breaks out.
That's right.
That's the story. Yeah. Well, yeah, just being a teenager, basically.
Like the Flowers of Algernon.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Man,
yeah.
that didn't get back.
Yeah.
But that's another prime example of it. You have this man who's just like a janitor. He's supposed to be this dumb janitor, and he's given this serum that he should not have access to. And now he's like, all of this stuff that I wasn't really thinking about, now I'm using my, well, not now, but functionally he's different. He can see things differently. He's like, oh, this is what's going on. And he decided, he's like, I'm gonna be this.
Yeah.
So he wanted to go back to where he was because he didn't want to see that type of society anymore. He wanted to go back to just being it simple, because once you learn it,
Yeah.
and there's another good example. I don't know if you've ever seen it, and it's actually a real life example. There's a man who is learning how to read. I think he's in his 30s or 40s. He has updates on TikTok. And because he didn't know how to read, there's certain things, unless he was watching the news, there's certain things he had no clue about. And now that he's reading, he's just like,
Yeah.
that's what he is, because now he's seeing what he's reading. His eyes are open. He's like, he's reading books, he's reading the newspaper, he's reading all of this, and he's just like, and you can, and he's being emotional about it, because he's like, yes, you know, his eyes are open and he does regret not reading, but it also, look at society, this is painful.
Yeah.
And people are, of course, supporting him, but people understand, like, if you've never had access to that, you've seen it, and now it's just, now you're seeing all of it, that is a huge, like, wake up
Yeah.
that you didn't think you'd have to deal with.
One of the things I read about evolution, especially technological evolution, and the things that we're trying to do biologically, is that we have not, emotionally and mentally, we are not caught up to what we want to do technically, technologically, or biologically. So we don't have the ethical makeup, and we will go too far. You know, these things can be damaging. So there are a lot. I love the idea of how much exploration is being done right now with ethics and technology, or ethics and medicine, or ethics and AI and things like that, because that's an area where we actually, it would be nice to see more advancement in that, but we haven't. We're not seeing that.
Yeah, like the AI that, you know, they have, you know, overseas, and then, but then, you know, of what they learn or what they teach them, if they teach them not to be racist and not to be, you know, they're, you know, and then it comes across, and they've seen that in them.
Yeah, it's learning off of the history of our society. Unfortunately, the history of our society kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So.
There's a lot wish you could just leave
And a
out.
final comment from Babylon 5, because Babylon 5, once again, is my favorite show.
Yes,
Babylon 5 shows that doesn't matter how many years in the future, centuries in the future, people are gonna act like people. That people are
Yeah.
going to be just like, you got something, I want it too, you are inferior, I'm superior, and no matter how many times people are gonna act like that.
Yeah, there's a kind of a belief or whatever that we are who we are, you know, and we would have to have something put in us or, you know, something else to not be human in order to not have those kind of.
Right.
Well, and it is, there's a comment made, I don't know if it's actually in the show itself or by the show creators, but it was in Star Trek, and somebody was like, you know, why won't you give the replicators to, you know, planets that are full of starving people? The response was, is because any planet that's still full of starving people will misuse, it's like you should, like the replicator has to come after you solve all the other problems, because if you haven't solved the problems, the best technology in the world is just going to recreate the problems in a new way.
Right. Yeah, they had. I think they were looking at it in the future too. Like once they did, I remember that episode.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much.
So, this is technically not on topic, but I heard it yesterday, and I wanted to ask the English teacher, what is your opinion about Merriam-Webster having decided we can end sentences and prepositions? Did you hear about that?
I didn't hear about that, but I'm glad because I do it all the time.
Yeah, Merriam-Webster just officially published the fact that they are declaring that rule defunct. And
Oh wow!
I mean, not that they get to make those decisions,
Yeah, but you know what? It's so funny because I remember when we first started using them pronouns for a singular person, what English teachers love to say is, well, grammatically it's not correct, and I was so glad when now we can say in the dictionary you can, because it's like people. I was like, come on, it's better to make people feel included and belonging than to be grammatically whatever. So once it changes, and it was funny. My sister, I found a word that she says all the time that we've been telling her for years is incorrect, and it's in the dictionary now as correct. Nice. So I sent it to her. I was like, here you go.
You have won.
So what was your comment?